Mound City Gods presents the Carnahan Courthouse, formerly known as the U.S. Court and Custom House Building in St. Louis, Missouri, Episode 3. Welcome to the next chapter in this continuing saga, as we tirelessly continue the investigations, digging deeper to reveal the true story worth telling. Episode 2 really got us thinking and validated some of the theories that were forming based on the evidence our research was providing. We believe what we have in store for you in this episode will be a substantial contribution in exposing the narrative and give us some insight into what is really going on all around this realm. We thank everyone for tuning in, and without further delay, it's time to demolish the narrative on these old world buildings. Looking at the Google satellite map of downtown St. Louis, we see our municipal building from episode 2, then City Hall from episode 1, and across the street on the same side is the Carnahan Courthouse. We can see from our map from 1907 that we found during the investigation in episode 2 that shows clearly this building was not there during that time. We see a line of unmarked buildings where the Carnahan building is, as well as the Civil Courts building. According to the source livingnewdeal.org, under the description heading, the U.S. Court and Custom House in St. Louis was constructed using U.S. Treasury Department funds between 1933 and 1935. Quote, the U.S. Court Custom House is located at Tucker and Market Streets. The building has 1/2 Egyptian-style columns in a giant order covering 5 floors. Eagles in an ancient Assyrian manner are on the corners. Stylized eagles are also located on the other side of the 12th and 11th Street entrances. The corners of the building are rounded, carved stone figures representing Justice Frame, the main entrance on Market Street. And that's end quote from the stlcin.missouri.org. The statues outside the main entrance were created by Benjamin Hawkins in 1939. Establishing the narrative. According to the building's wiki page on wikipedia.org, the Carnahan Courthouse, originally the U.S. Courthouse and Custom House, is a former federal courthouse in St. Louis, Missouri. Its namesake is former Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan. The architectural partnership of Morin, Russell, and Crowell designed the building, which was completed in 1935 at 1114 Market Street at the corner of Market Street and South Tucker Boulevard. According to one source, stlouispatina.com/Carnahan Courthouse, quote, this building is such a massive pile. Not the most elegant building in downtown St. Louis, but it has some beauty to it in its giant proportions, end quote. We see here again listed as Beaux Arts style. Now it's time to check the architect. We go back to the wiki page of the Carnahan building, and we see again that the architectural partnership of Moran, Russell, and Crowell designed the building, which was completed in 1935. Now, clicking the link from this group similar to Eckel and Mann from episode 1, it takes us to the page of John Moran. His wiki page states, Joseph Lawrence Moran, FAIA, born 1866, died 1933, was an American architect responsible for many downtown landmarks in St. Louis, Missouri. He was also active in Wisconsin and Texas. Continuing down now, under his career, it states, Quote, he entered the Boston office of Shepley, Rutan, and Coolidge as a young draftsman. There he helped design the 1893 Chicago Public Library, now the Chicago Cultural Center, and the 1894 Art Institute of Chicago. Sent by the firm to establish a branch office in St. Louis, his employers closed shop there in 1900, and Moran formed his own partnership, Moran, Russell, and Garden, with Ernest John Russell and Edward Garden. After the departure of Garden in 1909, it was briefly known as Moran and Russell, too, but with the addition of Willem de Forest Crowell, it became Moran, Russell, and Crowell. In 1911, the firm carved out a niche designing Carnegie libraries in towns in Missouri, Wisconsin, and Kansas. Moran also had married a local socialite, Isabel Chapman, in 1899, which aided his social connections, bringing commissions for local churches, office buildings, and a number of sizable mansions in St. Louis's new private places. He himself lived at number 40 Vandeventer Place on the most prestigious street in the city. Now, in 1902, Moran became a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and was appointed by Theodore Roosevelt to the United States Commission of Fine Arts in 1910. In 1915, he was elected president of the AIA. In 1925, he served as head of the St. Louis Memorial Plaza Commission. Moran died unexpectedly after an appendicitis attack in 1933 at the family summer home in New Hampshire. If we recall from episode 2, by 1884, Taylor, along with just 4 other architects, was admitted to the American Institute of Architects. So that meant something. Continuing down under his work, it states, stylistically versatile through its decades of activity, Moran's office was more commercially than artistically oriented, with work concentrated in the St. Louis area and a large number of hotel commissions in Texas. The St. Louis high-rises of the 1900s and 1910s show a clear influence from the Sullivan skyscrapers they stand next to, like the Wainwright Building, without Sullivan's distinctive ornament. The stripped classical style of the St. Louis Soldiers Memorial in 1939, a late example of its kind, is appropriate for its civic presence. Like other public buildings in the downtown Civic Plaza, the initial plans were far more elaborate before delay and budget pressures left the actual results simplified and scaled down. W.O. Mullingart joined the firm in 1930. When Moran died in 1933, this left William Crowell as its principal designer. The modernist 1941 Post-Dispatch printing plant, with its long ribbons of windows, preceded other international-style buildings in St. Louis by about 9 years. This was the firm's final major work. As we continue down to the section titled Select Projects, we see a long list of buildings, and what immediately jumps out is they are all almost one-year builds. Let's take a closer look at these examples, mostly built according to the narrative in the early 1900s. According to its wiki page, the Racine Heritage Museum is a historical museum building and former Carnegie Library located at 701 South Main Street in downtown Racine, Wisconsin. Designed by John Moran in the Beaux Arts style. Once again, we see that. The building served as the Racine Public Library from 1904 until 1958 and has housed the Racine Heritage Museum since 1963. John Moran designed the building in an architectural style that has been described varyingly as Beaux Arts and as a Renaissance revival. The 2-story building is constructed of Bedford limestone and brick with accents in St. Louis granite pressed brick and buff-colored terracotta. Then we see on the side it states built 1904, architect John Moran, and style, like we said, is in the Beaux Arts. On the wiki page for the Gunter Hotel, it is listed as a historic hotel in downtown San Antonio, Texas, United States, built in 1909 and designed by St. Louis architect John Moran. We see on the side, built 1909 by Westlake Construction Company, style listed as skyscraper, with the architects listed as Moran, Russell, and Garden, 1909. Herbert M. Green, 1926. Westlake, that construction company name sounds familiar. If we recall from episode 2, the Silk Exchange building, designed in 1901 by architect Isaac S. Taylor, has the same builder contractor listed, Westlake Construction Company. According to Dynamic St. Louis mo.gov, it has this to say about the next building on the list. Quote, the Laclede Gas and Light Company building, former address 1017 Olive. Year of construction 1911. Architectural firm architect Moran, Russell, Crowell. Standard architectural styles of classic revival front facade of brick common bond. The history states the Laclede Gas and Light Company was incorporated in 1857 by New York investors. Local businessman and politician Erastus Wells and associates later gained control of the company. Laclede Gas and Light remained in this building until 1970, when their new office tower was completed. The old Laclede Gas and Light Company building, 1017 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, is architecturally significant as a largely unaltered early 20th century skyscraper, according to the narrative. On its wiki page next up is the Dallas Municipal Building. It's a Dallas landmark located along South Harwood Street between Main and Commerce Street in the Main Street district of downtown Dallas, Texas, that served as the city's fourth city hall. Under history, it states the city purchased land for the fourth city hall between 1911 and 1912 from Eliza Trice, Otto H. Lang, and the Sweeney family, designed by C.D. Hill and Company in the Beaux Arts style. Plans were drawn up in 1913 in the spring. Fred A. Jones Building Company began construction. The building company filed for bankruptcy later that year, and the Board of Commissioners passed a resolution to accept the sale and transfer materials to C.C. Street Jr., who completed the building. The municipal building opened October 17, 1914. On the side of the entry, it states, Style Beaux Arts. Construction started 1913, with same opening date as mentioned, October 17, 1914, 1 year later. And here is where it becomes confusing. Under architects, it lists, as mentioned before, C.D. Hill and Company, Moran, Russell, and Crowell. Also, this building is listed under Moran's projects on his wiki page, which led us here to begin with. Next up, according to its wiki page, the Grand Galvez Resort and Spa is a historic 226-room resort hotel located in Galveston, Texas, United States, that opened in 1911 as the Hotel Galvez. It was named to honor Bernardo de Galvez, first Viscount of Galveston, for whom the city was named. Under history, it states Galveston civic leaders began plans to build the Hotel Galvez in 1898 after a fire destroyed another large hotel at the site, the Beach Hotel. After the devastating hurricane of 1900, which killed approximately 6,000 Galveston Island residents and leveled most of the buildings on the island, the plans accelerated in order to draw tourists back to the island. The hotel occupies the site where the Beach Hotel, Electric Pavilion, and Pagoda Bathhouse once stood. The hotel was designed by Moran, Russell, and Crowell of St. Louis, Missouri, in a combination of Mission Revival and Spanish Revival styles, and was constructed at a cost of $1 million. The Hotel Galvez opened in June of 1911. We see on the side, built 1910, style listed as Mission Spanish Revival, with the architects listed as Moran and Russell. Next, we have the wiki page of the Railway Exchange Building, which is a 84.4 meter or 277 foot, 21-story high-rise office building in St. Louis, Missouri. The 1914 steel frame building is in the Chicago School architectural style and was designed by architect Moran, Russell, and Crowell. The building was the city's tallest when it opened and remains the second largest building in downtown St. Louis by interior area, with almost 1,200,000 square feet, or 110,000 meters squared of space. The building was long home to the flagship stores of the famous bar chain of department stores and the headquarters of its parent company, May Department Stores, until Macy's purchased the brand. The store was rebranded as Macy's in 2006. Macy's sold the building in 2008 and closed the store in 2013. In January 2017, Hudson Holdings, a national historic property developer based in Delray Beach, Florida, purchased the building for $20 million. The city of St. Louis was granted an emergency condemnation on the 4th of January 2023 and proceeded to kick out people who appeared to be squatting and board up the building. We see on the side here, built 1913, style listed as early commercial, built by the Nort Company, with the architects listed as Moran, Russell, and Crowell. Next, we have the wiki page of the Rice, formerly the Rice Hotel. It is an historic building at 909 Texas Avenue in downtown Houston, Texas. Current building is the third now to occupy the site. It was completed in 1913 on the site of the former Capitol building of the Republic of Texas and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The old Capitol building was operated as a hotel until it was torn down and replaced by a new hotel around 1881. Jesse H. Jones built a new 17-story double-winged hotel in 1913, also called the Rice Hotel. This building underwent major expansions, adding a third wing in 1925, adding an 18th floor in 1951, and adding a 5-story motor lobby in 1958. In addition, there were several renovations during its life as a hotel. It continued to operate as a hotel before finally shutting down in 1977. After standing vacant for 21 years, the Rice was renovated as apartments and reopened in 1998 as the Post Rice Lofts. It was sold in 2014 and renamed simply the Rice. We see on the side, built 1913, no style listed, with the architects listed as Moran, Russell, and Crowell, Alfred C. Finn, and J. Russ Batty. Next, on its wiki page, we have the Southwestern Bell Building, which is a 28-story, 121-meter, 397-foot skyscraper constructed to be the headquarters of Southwestern Bell Telephone in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. At the time of its construction, it was Missouri's tallest building. The building, which was one of the first in St. Louis to use setbacks, has 17 individual roofs. Its architect was Moran, Russell, and Crowell, who also designed the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and the Railway Exchange Building in St. Louis. I.R. Timlin, Southwestern Bell's company architect, was associate architect on the project. We see on the side here, built 1926, style listed as Neo-Gothic, floor count of 28, with the architects listed as Moran, Russell, and Crowell. Speaking of the first Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, on Moran's wiki page under Select Projects, we see it is listed with the year 1923. When you go to its own wiki page, it says its building at 411 Locust Street was designed by St. Louis firm Moran, Russell, and Crowell in 1924. We see on the side, not built but established May 18th, 1914. No style listed, no architects listed. At least 10 years before the building was designed, the St. Louis branch was established. Back to the Moran wiki page. Under select projects, we see some entries that do not have wiki pages and are buildings from St. Louis. So let's take a look at some of these examples. According to Flickr.com, the Laclede Power Company building was designed by the architectural firm of Moran, Russell, and Garden and originally operated with three 500-kilowatt engines. The building's unusual wedge shape was determined by the property lines adjacent to the railroad tracks that run along the Mississippi River. A 1906 internal report stated that the power station property is well located but of the most unfortunate size and shape. The most serious feature, however, is the capacity limitation and the awkward manner in which apparatus must be installed." End quote. Now, contrary to popular belief, and the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, starring Judy Garland, electricity in St. Louis predates the 1904 World's Fair. The first extensive display of street illumination took place in 1882, and an ordinance enacted in 1884 allowed virtually anyone to go into the electrical utility business. In 1891, the Laclede Power Company organized for the purpose of making, distributing, and selling electricity. Here's another one that does have a wiki page. The First Church of Christ Scientist is an historic Christian Science church edifice located at 475 North Kings Highway Boulevard, corner of Westminster Place in St. Louis, Missouri. Built in 1903 to 1904, it was designed as a stone building in the classical revival style of architecture by Edward Gordon Garden of Moran, Russell, and Garden, and was the first institutional commission of that fledgling firm. Cost concerns, though, resulted in it being built of brick. It is a contributing property in the Holy Corners Historic District, which was added to the National Register of Historic Places on December 29, 1975. First Church of Christ Scientist, which had been founded in 1894, still holds services in this historic building. We see on the side, built 1903 to 1904, style listed as Classical Revival, with the architects listed as Moran, Russell, and Garden. The next building we looked up was the Racquet Club from 1906, which is also located in the Holy Corners Historic District, as is the very next entry on the Select Projects list, which is the Second Baptist Church in St. Louis, Missouri, 1907, another Holy Corners Historic District build. Now, the Racquet Club building does not have a wiki page, and while looking it up, we found something strange, which of course we will share with everyone. A simple Google search yielded a surprising result. What we are looking at is an old-looking black and white photograph from what is marked Missouri Life magazine, titled August 7th, 1862. What struck me as odd immediately is what appears to be cars in parking lots and on the streets, over 100 years newer looking, like models from the 1950s, or possibly it was supposed to say 1962 instead of 1862. Mistakes do happen. Back to the list. Back to our source, dynamic stlouismo.gov, we see an entry for the Holy Corners District, and it states as follows under the heading, History. This landmark designation includes 6 separate structures. St. John's Methodist Church at 5000 Washington Boulevard, 1902. First Church of Christ Scientist at 475 North Kings Highway, 1904. The Racquet Club at 476 North Kings Highway, 1906. The former Second Baptist Church at 520 North Kings Highway, 1907. The former Temple Israel at 5001 Washington Boulevard, 1908. And the Tuscan Temple at 5015 Westminster Place, 1908. Holy Corners acquired its name shortly after the turn of the century because of the concentration of churches that were erected at the intersection of Kings Highway and Washington Boulevards. The first of these buildings was St. John's Methodist Church, completed in 1902 from plans by Theodore C. Link. It was designed in the Italian Renaissance style using the classical elements, which were popular in public building design at that time. The Indiana limestone edifice has undergone several alterations. In 1928, an educational annex was erected on the church's west side, including the Singleton Chapel. In 1946, a new chancel was installed in the church and new stained glass windows were added in 1967. The next religious building in the area was the First Church of Christ Scientists that was occupied in 1904. It is simplified Italian Renaissance structure designed by the architectural firm of Moran, Russell, and Garden. This church was organized in 1894 as one of the first groups of its denomination. Its congregation originally met at two locations near the downtown district. Across Kings Highway from the First Church of Christ Scientists is the Racket Club, which was also designed by Moran, Russell, and Garden. It was founded in 1906. This club was the locale where the decision was made by a group of St. Louis civic leaders in 1927 to back the transatlantic flight by Charles A. Lindbergh. The Second Baptist Church was founded in 1833 and occupied its home at Kings Highway in Washington in 1907. Actually, it is a group of buildings connected by front and rear loggias. On the north side of the lot is the church auditorium, which is balanced on the south end by an educational wing. In the center of the rear loggia rises an impressive bell tower, which was truncated in recent years because of structural weakness. The principal building material is brick with terracotta trim. It was designed in the Italian Lombard style by Moran, Russell, and Garden. According to preservemissouri.org, the imposing Second Baptist Church, constructed in 1907 by the architectural firm of Moran, Russell, and Garden, firm that was successor once removed from the office of the famed H. H. Richardson, described as a tour de force of brickwork. This structure includes Missouri red granite, multicolored brick, terracotta trim, Minnesota yellow sandstone, and red roof tiles.
In our investigations, we've noticed a pattern starting to emerge. We always have a full bio for the architect, nice and neat, which seems to only make sense from an architect's perspective. The story goes like this. There will be an architect, always listed when you look into the history of any of these old world buildings. The said architect will be presented as an established expert or authority for whatever the style of architecture attributed to the building. That same architect will then have a series of buildings attributed to him, all with impossible build times, and in some cases, they have multiple builds occurring simultaneously. When you look into the architect's other works, they all have scant information following the same structure. Interestingly enough, we have seen conflicting information regarding which roles said architects actually fulfilled. Interestingly enough, we have seen conflicting information regarding which roles said architects actually fulfilled. However, we've not seen any information or details regarding building materials, laborers, food for the horses, and many of the other factors to be considered. If there's any information provided, it's typically stated that they employed some local laborers with a quick glance over it, and that's it. Which makes no sense considering the size and detailed work like intricate interior designs, fixtures, marble hallways, grand staircases, and massive ceilings these buildings contain.
And now for something similar. A According to Flickr.com, the Carnahan Courthouse, built in 1935, described as, quote, stripped classical revival style, end quote. This sounds like the style of the Soldiers' Memorial as described on Moran's wiki page, which states, the stripped classical style, quote, end quote. Looking for something similar to the Carnahan Courthouse, we came across the Federal Judicial Center website under a list of historic federal courthouses in Missouri. There are a few that seem similar in style, and interesting to note, the old post office and customs house in St. Louis served as its first federal courthouse. According to the Living New Deal website, we see an example from Bethany, Missouri, started in 1939 and completed in 1940. Similar narrative to our building being built by New Deal money. On historicdetroit.org, we have the Theodore J. Levin U.S. Courthouse being described as, quote, an Art Deco Art Modern rectangular building, end quote. The source continues under the heading, quote, out with the old. As Detroit grew rapidly through the 1920s, it was decided a new, larger building was needed to replace the castle-like federal building in Detroit. The old building housed the city's post office, federal courthouse, and customs office, and despite its beauty and opulence, was simply too small for a burgeoning metropolis. On April 22nd, 1930, the Federal Budget Bureau recommended that Detroit get a new federal building and customs house at a price of nearly $5 million, about $63.9 million today. Robert O. Derrick and Branson V. Gamber, best known for designing the Henry Ford Museum, were selected as the architects of the new building. Among the more opulent rooms in the old federal building was the so-called $1 million courtroom. Federal Judge Arthur J. Tuttle arranged to have his courtroom dismantled piece by piece and replaced exactly as it was in the 1897 building. The old federal building was torn down at the end of 1931. For nearly 3 years, as the new courthouse was being built, the federal employees took up temporary quarters in rented buildings, including the Recreation Building across Lafayette Boulevard. Another outstanding epoch. On October 12, 1932, about 1,500 people braved chilly temperatures as the 4.5-ton Black American granite cornerstone was swung into place. On the side, it says opened 1934. Next, on its wiki page, we have the United States Courthouse and Post Office, also known as Federal Courts Building. It is a historic courthouse and post office located at Kansas City, Missouri. From 1934, this example is another New Deal money beneficiary. The style is listed as modern. Next on its wiki page, we have the Jasper County Courthouse, which is a 176-foot tall historic courthouse located in Carthage, Jasper County, Missouri. The courthouse is built on the site of the original Jasper County Courthouse, which was burned in the Battle of Carthage during the American Civil War. Built from 1894 to 1895, the Jasper County Courthouse was designed by architect Max A. Orlop Jr. in the Romanesque Revival style and built using local Carthage marble. It is the second most photographed building in Missouri, listed on the side as built in 1894 to 1895, Romanesque Revival, Richardsonian Romanesque. We know Richardsonian is our crew's specialty. On kchistory.org website, it states the Jackson County Courthouse, built of native stone with several turrets and a slate roof, was opened April 14, 1892. It occupied a square block, Oak to Locust Streets, 5th Street to Missouri Avenue. It replaced an earlier courthouse at the northeast corner of 2nd and Main Streets, which was built in 1868 by a sock company and originally was intended for a hotel. Shoo, if you can believe that story, you'll believe anything. The company failed before the building was finished, and the county court bought the intended hostelry for $20,000. 2 stories were blown off in the tornado of 1886, and the remaining 3 stories were torn down in 1892 when the impressive new courthouse as pictured was built. On March 23, 1935, the present courthouse, located between 12th and 13th and Oak and Locust, was opened. The old fortress-like structure was razed for salvage between 1936 and 1940. Now it's time to just ask the AI. We knew from last episode that we were onto something with the idea that these one-year builds seem impossible, and that the more likely scenario is that we are looking at modernizations/renovations of older structures. So far, the AI has not been the most cooperative source, so let's see if we can form some more specific questions in order to get the AI to blow the lid off this thing and once and for all spill the beans on what is really going on. We're going to send it over to Johnny Omega to break down Just Ask the AI.
We asked the AI a few questions in an attempt to gain a little clarity, and what we found blows a massive hole through the official story, in our opinion. We encourage our viewers to always keep an open mind and form their own conclusions and opinions. Come along and join us down this rabbit hole. We asked how long would it take to renovate and modernize an old world stone building. The task would vary in time in the early 1900s. Naturally, this depends on several factors, such as the building's current condition and the extent of the renovations and the resources that are available. Listen closely to the answer. Updating with modern amenities like plumbing and electricity while preserving historical features could take several months to a couple of years. Structural repairs would take longer. Now hold on, let's take a second to reflect on this for a moment. Just to update and renovate with plumbing and electricity could take a couple of years and even longer for structural repairs. So we have a time frame of 2 years to plumb and wire an old world stone building. From our investigations into the construction of the St. Louis City Hall building, it has been ascertained that it takes approximately 1 year to break ground and lay the cornerstone. So 3 years to break ground, plumb, and wire without accounting for the time to actually build the structure and then the interior work to complete the building. Logically, one can only ascertain from this data that a 1 to 2 year build is preposterous, in our opinion. Moreover, when we see 2 years given as the time frame for its construction, it's more than likely only being renovated with modern amenities of the time, circa early 1900s. Also, taken into consideration the time required for procuring and preparing the materials, the labor force, and limitations due to the methods used at that time. We then asked how large of a workforce would be required to renovate and modernize an old world stone building in the early 1900s. The answer we got was shocking. The size of the workforce would vary depending on the size of the building, the scope of the repairs, and the complexity of the plan. We have a list composed. General laborers would be required. We would need 10 to 30. So we would need general laborers, 10 to 30. We would need stonemasons, 5 to 15. We would need carpenters, 5 to 10. We would need plumbers, 2 to 5. Electricians, 2 to 5. The painters and decorators, we would need 5 to 10. Architects and engineers, are you ready for this? 1 to 3. Roofers, 3 to 7. And the project managers / supervisors, 1 to 3. In total, it might take a workforce of around 20 to 60 people. Naturally, a more complex project could take a larger workforce. Just remember these projections of the amount of crew members and the time frame provided. Remember, our goal primarily here is to determine if it's possible to construct buildings like this in a 2-year time frame that's typically given for these buildings. Or is it more probable that these buildings were merely renovated, updated, altered, and or painted and covered up, in some instances whitewashed? Naturally, we'll let you be the judge. Let's continue with our questions in an attempt to make sense of his story. We asked how long would it take to fully build from the ground up and modernize an old world building in the early 1900s. The AI clearly states that it would take a considerable amount of time due to the limitations of the early 1900s. So design and planning, it says 1 year. For the foundation and the structure, 1 to 2 years. Interior and modernization, that could take 6 months to 1 year. And then the landscaping, it says 3 months. Overall, the whole process might take 2 to 4 years. We then asked, what if average excavation time is added to the aforementioned project? This is where it gets interesting. Excavation for a large municipal building can be a large undertaking. The techniques were not as advanced in the early 1900s. Excavation could take from 6 months to 1 year. This would revise the entire timeline for construction. Design and planning, 1 to 2 years. Excavation, 1 to 2 years. Foundation and structure, 2 to 4 years. Exterior and landscaping, 3 months to 1 year. Final inspections, a few months. Overall, 5 to 9 years for completion of one building. Then it adds, the exact duration would depend on the specific project and the efficiency of guess who? The construction and excavation teams. The ones that seem to be non-existent when we look into his story on these buildings. This right here should raise a red flag because you'll find zero mention of engineers, construction teams, excavators, etc. for any of the buildings that we've looked into. Most of the buildings, they actually only list one architect responsible for the entire build when it's clear that you require multiple architects and engineers on site during construction. Finally, we asked, additionally, what would be the total workforce for this project detailed above? For constructing and modernizing a large municipal building in the early 1900s, including excavation, the workforce would need to be substantial. Then the AI gives us an estimate of the total required workforce across the various stages of construction. So for designing and planning, you would need architects and engineers, 3 to 6. Remember, this includes both architects and structural engineers. You would need surveyors, 2 to 4. You would need excavators and heavy machine operators, 5 to 10. And in the early 1900s, this might include steam shovels and horses. Okay? That's going to be their primary tool or apparatus for excavating. Let's not forget that. You would need general laborers, 5 to 10. For the foundation and the structure, you would need stonemasons, 15 to 30. You would need carpenters, 10 to 20. You would need general laborers, 15 to 30. You would need bricklayers, 5 to 10. You would also need people for the interior and for modernization. So we're talking plumbers, 5 to 10. Electricians, 5 to 10. HVAC specialists of that time, 3 to 7. Carpenters and joiners, 10 to 15. Now, for the exterior and the landscaping, you would need painters and decorators, 10 to 15. You would need landscapers and gardeners, 5 to 10. Stone and brick masons, 5 to 10. Guess what? You need project and supervision, 3 to 5. You need foremen, 3 to 5. It states that this is an estimate, accounts for the overlapping phases of construction, and the specific number could vary depending on the specific project. We then asked, what would be the average cost for the project detailed above? It includes several factors, includes materials, labor, and, of course, the project size. Design and planning, we're talking 5 to 10% of the total budget. Excavation, 10 to 15,000. Foundation and structure, you're talking $500,000 to $2 million. Interior modernization, again, $200,000 to $800,000. Exterior and landscaping, $100,000 to $200,000. Project management, supervision, it's going to cost 5 to 10% of the total project cost. And then the estimated cost, $1 to $3 million. We then ask the AI, of course, is that what it would cost then or now? To adjust to inflation and charges under construction, it's estimated at $40 to $120 million. Just let that sink in and take that for consideration. Now, when you look at any of the world's fairs, they say they built the entire thing in 2 years with budgets under $40 million for the entire fair. When the narrative states that the only man responsible was the architect and all personnel are irrelevant, again, you be the judge and form your own conclusions, if that is even possible. From these answers, we can conclude that the old world construction of these massive buildings were costly, and not just monetary for the materials, but in labor as well as for the actual skilled laborers, engineers, carpenters, etc., the actual crews that executed the plans or that did the work. That 1 to 2 year timeline that is typically given according to the narrative would barely cover updating an old world stone building. It could take even longer depending on the size and the complexity of the project. Check out our first video on the St. Louis City Hall building. It was stated that it took a year, so 1 year time span to break ground, just to break the ground. I will leave you with some crucial points to consider. 1 to 2 years for excavation, depending on size and complexity. Remember that when we look at the St. Louis World's Fair, foundation and structural would take 2 to 4 years to complete. The AI gives us a time frame of several months to 2 years just to update and modernize the building, not to mention the fact that multiple engineers and architects would be required and play a pivotal role in the construction process. Not just one lone architect and poof, the building is magically constructed. Or maybe it is, and there's something that we do not know here, a missing piece of the puzzle that we do not have to solve at this moment. We have yet to see any of the several engineers required to be listed. From these findings, we can clearly see a 1 to 2 year time frame for the completion of an old world stone building is completely out of the question. One architect could not handle all of the work required for a complete build. There's never a mention of any of the engineers, foremen, construction crews, heavy machinery operators, supporting architects, or anything. Therefore, one person listed in his story books as being responsible for the complete build is preposterous. From the scant illustrations to the architects to the 1 to 2 year time frame given, it would make more sense that these buildings were updated and renovated and modernized, and in some cases whitewashed to appear as brand new buildings, given the timeline that the AI provided for us.
Now it's time for the breakdown, discussion, and conclusions list of red flags, inconsistencies. Number one on the list is still no mention of engineers. What's the deal with that? Number two, between the examples of Taylor and the crew for this episode's building, we see many styles, and yet many are very similar looking. I guess due to the Beaux Arts phenomena, my question is, when looking at all these similar buildings in the scope, why was it then seemingly arbitrary that some buildings were demolished while some still stand today, and some were regarded as ugly or obsolete and others go for large sums of money and or have been renovated and still in use? It just seems strange why some were demolished and some still stand, even though they are similar. Point number three is the 1907 map has been on my mind, and we've been trying to figure out what buildings or what, since so many are not listed, and even some that are numbered no longer exist. Things just seem so off when looking at the layout now and comparing it to over 100 years ago. It may seem silly because one would not think it should line up perfectly, but the problem is more so buildings seem to have moved in some cases. Again, this map of St. Louis in 1907 deserves a deep dive video that matches all possible buildings in the map to their modern counterparts and fully getting a clearer picture of what we are looking at with this treasure of information. Point number four, the established pattern of the established narrative. It's becoming, in some ways, the same story over and over like Groundhog Day when it comes to types of inconsistencies and build times of 1 year that we are seeing. Can this be a coincidence? It is becoming more predictable the further we investigate what we are most likely to find with each new example. During our research, we were not at all trying to seek these things out. It was just by looking over the information did these patterns emerge and continue over and over these first 3 episodes. Of course, we have had fires in every episode. We saw 1 year builds in each episode, some more than others. We have seen architects that seem more like celebrities of the time. The architects covered so far all have extensive lists of works, buildings credited to their name, again, some more than others. We have attempted to use as many as possible examples to illustrate the narrative. We have seen the AI appear to be covering up something by being vague when answering questions that we had about these builds. We eventually got the AI to spill the beans and show that it would take far longer than a year or two to do what the narrative said was done in that time. We saw it would take a year or two just to modernize an existing building in 1900. We have consistently seen many crucial details left out of the narrative completely in most cases, such as an engineer, excavation time, building companies that were actually building all of these buildings, the fact that the architect would then be overseeing these projects that were overlapping and in completely different states in some cases, the time it took to modernize and decorate the interior of these buildings, and the extensive skilled workforce from varying disciplines required to pull it all off. Despite the fires and poor record keeping of the past, we always know one thing for sure with absolute certainty according to the narrative, and that is down to the red cent exactly what everything cost, even though so many expenses as mentioned above are absent from the calculations. Number 5. Looking back at the wiki entry for John Moran under the heading Work, it states, quote, like other public buildings in the downtown Civic Plaza, the initial plans were far more elaborate before delay and budget pressures left the actual results simplified and scaled down, end quote. Is this what really happened? Or was it that there were so many elaborate old world buildings already there and the city could only afford to modernize so many? To conclude episode 3, I want to start off by saying in the early days of our expedition to uncover the truth by examining the origin stories of these buildings in our home city, we were under the impression that each of these buildings we listed in the series would have a unique story to tell. We were wrong to believe such an assumption. After the first 2 episodes/buildings, a different impression was forming, and by this third deep dive, a clear conclusion became solidified. It is because of this belief that we will move on to a new series of videos that take a closer look at the topic that originally piqued our interest into questioning the narrative of these buildings in cities across America and the entire realm. That topic, of course, is the Columbian Exposition of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As for the conclusion that was staring us in the face during these first 3 episodes, it is something that has been proposed before for much older buildings. The evidence collected from our research, along with finally getting the AI to crack and reveal the truth, allowed us to conclude with high confidence that the buildings we see in our cities that look more ancient than we are led to believe are just that, older than we are led to believe. They are most likely old world buildings that we are looking at, and yet we still do not know the old world builders. It is because of the age of the buildings that when the 20th century came around, these buildings were either modernized and repurposed or pulverized and forgotten. Electricity, indoor plumbing, and restoration/demolition were enough of a task for many of these buildings to last 2 to 3 years or more to complete, depending on economic conditions at the time and place. This line of thought seems to be the only logical explanation, considering many of the buildings we have researched cite an incredible excavation to completion timeline of a mere year or two. Looking back over all of the research of these 3 episodes and considering the facts presented by the narrative so far, we begin to see not a clearer picture of our history, but instead we see patterns, inconsistencies, and improbabilities that summed up seem to make only one thing clear, that this is not our story. For all of the localities, cities, and states around this country, we cannot speak with certainty since we have not done the research as of yet. When it comes to St. Louis, Missouri, that's where we are from and is what we know. What we know for sure is something is going on here that smells funny, and it is not coming from the Mississippi River. This is Mound City we are talking about here. According to some sources, this same place has been continuously inhabited for over 1,000 years unbroken. Why is it then that we cannot even tell with certainty what happened here 125 years ago? the classic burning of history. There are many anecdotal stories, articles, and pictures in some cases, but does that make any of it true? That, of course, is one of the main tenets of this channel, to figure out through the evidence what exactly is going on here. Just as the narrative oftentimes seems to reverse engineer the story in hopes of it making sense, we must unwind the narratives across the board with hopes of finding the clues that will help us make sense of this riddle. Solving this problem will require the process of elimination. By identifying and dispelling any and all falsities or improbabilities, we come closer to our answer by eliminating what our reality cannot be. Through the unfolding of the narrative, we can potentially see where things tie together and where things begin to unravel.
As always, we encourage you to be the judge and form your own opinions, conclusions, in order to provide answers to the most basic questions when looking at this subject logically. Let us know what you think and if you have a building that you would like us to explore.
This has been a Mound City Gods production. We thank you for viewing. Please comment, like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.
Until next time, Inspirata Florut. Peace.